Are you the best feeler, thinker, sensor, or intuitive? The answer might not be what you expect. Today we're going to talk about, kind of like based on a socionics theory, that your second function is the creative function, and your sixth function, which I guess is the inverse of your second function, is something that you're subconsciously good at and you kind of value. Whereas the fifth function, which is the inverse of your first function, is something that you're subconsciously good at but you don't value. So it's based on this.
So yeah, okay, let's get into it. I guess I'll start with the best thinkers. So that would be INTJ, ISTJ, ESTP, and ENTP. With the ISTJs and INTJs, I think how it kind of manifests is that we use TI when it kind of strengthens our TE argument. So like usually we kind of just look for like TE external factors and kind of use that as proof. But if we see like, oh, there's this TI mechanism that really adds value to this whole thing, then I would kind of include that in my line of thought, I think.
Oh, that's kind of interesting. So the way I approached this was basically to just give examples of how it manifests in reality. So for the ITJs, I think of them as having the most thorough knowledge of something in general. And if I can rely on someone to execute like an enterprise from the start to finish, I think of like INTJs and ISTJs as capable. And I think probably it is for why you say, because they think of all the TE things they have to do and make sure they understand the TI principles that are relevant to their TE undertakings. And that's why they could finish like one project or enterprise.
But it's probably like sparse TI. It's definitely not like I have a whole TI model somewhere in my brain, but little links here and there maybe that kind of help the TE. And I kind of wanted to contrast this with like the ESTJs and ENTJs, because I think these types more often like to test things or think about all the possible tests that could be done externally. I don't think they often think about the TI mechanisms. And I kind of see this sometimes when I interact like with an ENTJ or something like that.
Yeah, I do think that the ETJs, a lot of times they have a greater attitude of like, don't let these principles like slow me down. Like, let's just try this and move on to the next thing. So it's a big contrast to the ITJs.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and then on to the ESTPs and ENTPs. So I think they often can use TE facts to supplement their TI model in a sense. I think I've heard like, you know, ESTPs and ENTPs talk about things and kind of explain their whole theoretical framework, but then sometimes be like, oh yes, and this is external proof of this, and in the same way that it kind of strengthens that TI model. And I think in reverse, like the ISTPs and INTPs can more easily reject kind of TE facts or show skepticism towards them if it doesn't make sense to their TI model.
Yeah, for the reality, I see a lot of the ENTPs and ESTPs like rising up in corporations. And I think it's because of the TI is kind of, I guess, really good at what they do, or they have like a good, consistent knowledge base, but then their TE is helping them apply that knowledge in a realistic way also. And also I think of like the ETPs as really multifaceted thinkers, so they tend to understand like a whole system from varying points of view. And when you also have a bit of TE, it can really help you like get places and apply that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So on to the best feelers, who are ISFJs, INFJs, ESFPs, and ENFPs. So to start off with the IXFJs, I find that in like the ones that I know in my life can often actually be like quite supportive of like my FI desires and kind of like see the value of it or kind of understand the motivation of it. And also I think they let their emotions show a little bit less in like a stereotypical FE intentional way. Like I have seen some ISFJs who are a little quirkier, kind of like kind of more like, internally reactive as opposed to like intentionally emotive or affective. Contrast, I feel like the EXFJs are like almost always pretty intentional with their emotional display and how they want to communicate and how they want to come across. I think they also tend to maybe more so interpret FI motivations within like the context of like FE and TI too.
I think in real life scenarios, you see a lot of them like gravitate towards humanitarian work, which I think of obviously as very feelerly. Yeah, a lot of them gravitate towards either being therapists or studying psychology or starting some sort of social cause. And I think FE, being good at emotional affect, plus a good helping of FI makes them both effective interpersonally, and they have a good FI understanding of other people, or putting oneself in others' shoes or whatever, or accepting individual differences, which I think would account for their success in the area and being, empathetic. Yeah, in contrast for EFJs, this is just from personal experience, but I think a lot of EFJs are so caught up on the FE external harmony or emotional environment that they almost dislike or discount FI experiences. They want to quash the FI in service of FE.
So onto the EXFPs. So I feel like they still tend to go along with their FI motivations and their self-referential values, but at the same time they're still kind of fairly aware of how that fits or how they fit within the current social atmosphere. There was an ENFP where we were talking about how pop stars present themselves or something, and I was they can present themselves however they want, and I think his argument was more well, they have to be aware of the impact when they do this has this effect on people, and they should be more responsible and that kind of thing. But they do still act on their FI desires. So I think there's just kind of, a more of a social awareness with them.
Wait, were you going to contrast this
to
INFPs?
Yeah. I think they give more credence maybe or value to the FE social atmosphere. I think with IXFPs, they too tend to be aware of it, but might not care that much about it. And might, care more about their FI values.
Oh, yeah. For the EFPs, I've heard universally beloved and charming. So I think of ENFPs as ESFPs as the most close to the universally liked person. I think of that as the best feeler. So they invite adoration by everyone. Also, something that I just kind of thought of is I know two ENFPs and they're both in some sort of humanitarian thing, but it's not they never say I want to do this to help someone. They always say I want to do this because it's my passion, but their passion happens to be something that helps everyone.
It has FE value.
Yeah, right. So I think of that as a perfect embodiment of conscious FI values with subconsciously strong FE underpinning. In contrast, the IFPs, we are not universally beloved because we're really blunt sometimes, because sometimes we just state our values because we don't really care that they're not in line with the FE thing, because we don't value that function.
It's interesting, just as an FE blind person, I wish that I could want a career path that was more humanitarian or something, but my FI just I guess doesn't. Okay, so the best intuitives are the INFP, INTP, ENFJ, ENTJ. So I'll start with the ENXJs. So one thing I noticed in high school, I think there's a couple of people who I'm pretty sure are ENFJ. I found that they did pretty well in English class with literature, essays and analyzing literature and stuff. And I think that's something I always struggled with due to only seeing reality as it is and not seeing all these thematic elements. But I wonder for them if it's because they can use NE if needed and they can actually kind of theorize all these kind of abstract conceptual literary world that is created. And also I found that ENTJs can more easily follow NE users' train of thought than I can. Usually if there's an NE conversation and it kind of just goes from here to here to here, and I'm kind of sitting there okay, wait, I need to recalibrate every time the topic changes, they can usually keep up with that pretty well.
For ENFJs and ENTJs, I think they have really good conceptual knowledge sometimes. I put Megan Lavosa as the example, who's an ENFJ YouTuber about MBTI. I think her understandings of the 8 cognitive functions are pretty good. She comes up with good ways of understanding something that she doesn't have, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's pretty NE, I guess.
Yeah. And in terms of real life and history, I think ENFJs in history have come up with a bunch of social change programs that I think needed a good dose of intuition or just envisioning the world in a different way, I guess. And for ENTJs, I think there were some famous cases where there were good business world developments, and I think that also you need new innovative ideas along with long-term potential, so it's a good NE and I balance to be successful in that sense.
In contrast, so the INXJs, I feel we really can't imagine much outside of what exists in reality. Like, it's just
Or like just your NI like tunnel vision. You guys
Yeah.
are famous for having the tunnel
Yeah,
vision.
exactly. So I feel like the ENXJs are much more kind of broad-minded in that sense. In comparison, we're just like, yeah, NE is just so difficult for us. So on to the INXPs. Yeah, this one I think I have like less information on, but I do think that you and even some INTPs do see like cause-effect relationships, which I would relate more to NI.
For the INFP, I just wrote that, oh, guess what? There's like a bunch of great writers who are INFP. I guess it's a stereotype. But I think that's because they can come up with the ideas for the plot and have just enough NI to like see through the whole plot of the plot.
Right.
But yeah, we're good like storytellers, and I think that needs good intuition for
Right.
that. Oh, for INTPs, I wrote like many revolutionary ideas came up because of INTPs, and I also think that it's almost like a magic. You need some sort of NI, like, oh yeah, this is how the world works in a TI way to come up with like, oh, the theory of light or whatever. But then you also need to be any like creative enough to even think that way in the first place. So I think a lot of like big leap ideas came from INTPs throughout history. And I think INTPs are very famous for like a really quirky way of thinking, which I also
Yeah.
think of as like a high intuition kind of thing.
Yeah. So in contrast to the INXPs, the ENXPs, I think, are too kind of bombarded with all the NE possibilities. So I've never really seen like a dominant NE person be like, oh yes, there's this singular pattern that I even have an inkling about. It's more like there are 5 things that maybe I have an inkling about, or like
Yeah, okay, so yeah, I agree with that. But also, like, I just realized that for INTPs, they might be like seeing some sort of like TI logical pattern, but I think I see FI like emotional patterns all the time.
right.
So maybe that's some sort of weird NI, because I think
Yeah.
where my NI is working most often is to see people's motivations. I think I see that a lot actually.
Yeah.
Like I can always tell when someone likes me or doesn't like me, or wants something from me or doesn't want something
Right.
from me. And I think it ties into the storytelling thing.
And I think that's same with me. Like I think my TI ties into my NI.
Oh, wait, a side note, ENFPs never tell when someone wants something from them. They're always like shocked. It's like, oh, guess what? That person wanted to be in a relationship with me. Whoa. And I'm like, you didn't see that coming? Like, no.
Right. That makes sense, because I guess both FI and TI have this rigorous evaluation system where you could kind of start to connect some patterns in there. On to the best sensors. So these are the ISFPs, ISTPs, ESFJs, and ESTJs. So to start off with the ESXJs, I find them kind of often quite aware of like the external environment, and also kind of very grounded in reality in a sense. Like they kind of just are savvy and know how the world works in a sense. I know like both ESFJs and ESTJs who are just like, well, this is just the way the world is. It's like this SE knowledge of like, yeah, things interact in this way, and they kind of just accept it in that sense. As opposed to the ISXJs, I think they tend to see most things through their SI filter in a sense. So most knowledge goes back into this more symbolic or philosophical kind of realm. They can kind of encode or symbolize all this information into very specific terminology or very specific concepts that I guess aren't that grounded in SE reality, and I can kind of be a little bit lost in trying to figure out where exactly they're coming from. But I think with the ESXJs, I don't have that problem. I think they're a little bit more aware of what actually happens in SE reality.
Yeah, they're just really good with their hands. Okay, for ESTJ, I wrote best data analyst, question mark. Also surprisingly good with their hands and physical skills.
Yeah.
I guess this is based on my boyfriend, who is really good at like a bunch of random physical skills, and he calls himself like the jack of all trades, which is true. When something breaks, you can usually fix it. I guess that's like SI. You use all of your previous experiences, plus you have a good reactivity to SE, things that pop up along the way. For ESFJs, I'm sure they also have that same thing, but then here, my mom is a data point, so she's like a pretty good cook, and I think I know like a couple. Your mom is a good cook too. Yeah, I think they're really good at maintaining a great sensory atmosphere. So I think for moms, it's like keeping like a really cozy house. And I know like one other ESFJ person whose house is also like really comfy looking, and just like a nice SI nest atmosphere type thing. That's also like a good amount of SE, because for the ISXJs, sometimes they can be caught up in their SI and just repeating the SI, and they don't have as good of a reaction when a crazy SE thing comes their way. They are not as able to handle it in the moment.
Yeah, that's true. The ESXJs do come off as kind of mature in this sense because they can kind of just handle the SE curveballs that life throws at them. Okay, so on to the ISXPs. I feel like when they talk about their sort of arguments, like their SE and I ideas or theories, they can retain more information to actually support their claims. So I feel like there might be a little bit of like sensory retention there because they can often come up with a lot of specific examples, especially compared to like the ESXPs. Maybe similar to like NI, I feel like we talk more in generalities or more maybe exploring ideas in the present moment, whereas I think the ISXPs tend to have a little bit of knowledge kind of stored away somewhere to bring up.
Okay, so for the ISXPs, this is kind of like they're so famously good at sensing. Okay, so I guess ISTPs are pretty famous for their like bodily skills, and I think like I know ISTPs who are really good at doing like a few particularly physically challenging things, and I think it kind of makes sense because with high SE, they're consciously good at reacting to things that come their way, but with pretty strong SI to back it up, I think they can learn and keep getting better at that thing, which I think is why there's like that ninja stereotype, because they keep building on the SE knowledge little by little.
Right.
And I think ISFPs are really famous for being good artists or musicians. It's the same thing, like their SE is good at doing the thing in the present moment, but I think all the ISFPs, they gradually get better and better at the thing because of like the SI retention.
Right.
Yeah, versus the ESXPs, I don't think they value retaining the thing as much. Like I think they react to each SE thing as if it were a separate thing, and they almost like resist trying to fit that new thing into a pre-existing pattern and trying to like learn from it.
Right. I think there actually could be something to this theory.
Yeah, I think as an INFP, I relate more to being the best intuitive rather than the best feeler, and I think it's even in the stereotype sense, like INFPs are said to have their feelings not in control, like they're depressed or anxious or something, or just generally like feeling too deeply. I don't think of that as being the best feeler. I think that's like you're mismanaging your emotions, whereas I see like the EXFPs as having things much more balanced in a feeling sense.
Yeah, I definitely don't think I'm the best intuitive because like I have no NE like whatsoever, but I can see how I use like some TI here and there. I wonder if you guys relate to like what your sixth function is and how you use it, because I feel like for both of us, we tend to use it kind of just like a little snippet here and a little snippet there, but not in this whole totality. Like for me, I don't think I have an entire TI framework of like how some sort of big system works, but here and there I can kind of be like, oh, there maybe that's like a potential TI reason for this thing to happen, or maybe that's a TI reason there. And so it kind of just comes and goes very quickly. And I think it's the same with your NI, right? You just kind of have like a little inkling.
Yeah, I have inklings of what's gonna happen, like almost like in a predictive sense, which is what I associate with NI, but it's not very clear, and it's definitely not orderly. It's just like whoosh, okay, do I grab onto it? But yeah.
So there's no kind of overall, I guess, structure that like I guess higher NI users.
Yeah, I don't think there's an overall NI. I think I get like pangs of NI.
Right.
It's like, whoa.
Same with me and TI. I just get pangs of TI. So I wonder if the rest of the functions, if you guys relate to the kind of pang of the sixth function. And yeah, let us know if you relate with these categorizations. And yeah, it's always cool to hear from you guys because, you know, we're just talking about ourselves, so it's always cool to have more input.
We're usually talking about ourselves and like 5 data points that we've gathered through our like limited friends since we're both introverts.
Yeah, so if you guys want to be typed, we do offer typing services, which you can check out at cognitiveaid.com, which we do on objective measures. And we also have a Patreon page, which you guys can check out, where we offer exclusive perks for you guys. So we'll link both of those in the description below. And as always, thanks so much for watching.